Hello and welcome to the WestWords Masterclass podcast for today. I'm James Roy, I'm your host, and today I'm talking to James Knight. Now, James Knight has been working in various forms of media for 30 years or so. His roles have included television reporter, sports commentator, documentary producer, radio newsreader, newspaper journalist, and author. And he's written something like 13 adult non-fiction books, and he's currently working on the first book in a children's series, which I'll ask him about in just a minute. These days, he visits schools to talk about storytelling. I've seen James in action. He's a very impressive storyteller. He's currently overseeing a not-for-profit global book project, which he might chat about a bit. This is to include high school children from about a dozen countries across the world. He's a renowned traveller. He's lived and worked in India and has been a volunteer community worker in Ecuador and in Ethiopia. Ethiopia, one of the places that I have quite close to my heart as well. And also, and this is where we start to question James's sanity, I guess, he runs marathons for fun. See, that's a sentence, James, that's a sentence that I don't think makes any sense to anyone.
Yeah, it's a bit of a contradiction, isn't it, James? I went out for a 18K run this morning and I had the grand piano on my back for the last 10, so its definition of stupidity is definitely plodding along the pavement for more than about 10 or 15 minutes in one go. But it's worth it.
It's crazy. Is it really, though? Is it, though?
Oh, listen, to be honest, to me, it's actually like writing a book. And I say that because you would know yourself that you can bleed over the keyboard or you can pull hair out that you can't afford to lose when you're writing a book and you're up at, oh God, my clock, and you go to bed at even later and you sort of go, why am I doing this? And on every Sunday morning when you're training for a marathon, bling, the alarm goes off at 5:30 or somewhat similar, and you go, I've got 3 hours of running ahead without a break. What are you doing, you idiot? But then all those months later, you either open a fresh box from the publisher and see a book for the first time, or you see it on a bookshelf in a bookstore, or you cross that finish line in a marathon and you go, that's pretty cool. So there's a bit of sort of self-congratulation there, but it's I actually equate the two together. So the tip for you is to, after this, go out and have a, I don't know, let's start off gently, 10, 15K.
What I like about what you just said is that you said that writing a book is a lot like running a marathon, and I've written a book, so I don't need to run the marathon now because I know what it feels like, apparently.
There you go. I'm just presenting you with the medal over your neck right now.
Thank you so much. I'll stand and salute and might even have some tears in my eyes. So today we're chatting with James about hunting and gathering ideas. We talked to Deborah Bella in an earlier podcast about this idea of hunting and gathering ideas, but I think it's good to talk to a few different writers about how they approach this, especially considering that you have written predominantly non-fiction books. So let's talk about how that might be different from gathering for a fiction book. Or are the principles the same?
I think the principles are the same, but I can only say how I work, and I come from a journalistic background. And when I talk about writing, I mention the fundamentals of journalism, which based around just a matter of a few words, a handful of words: who, what, where, why, when, and how. And I will hammer those words until the end of my dear days because they are just so important to me. They are the most necessary tools in my work kit because they can keep you going all day. And to hunt for an idea or search for an idea to begin with, it all begins with asking questions. And James, I actually think the process of asking questions is something we don't do broadly, forget writing, but broadly across society as well, because it's got all the critical thinking, the problem solving, all the buzzwords that we talk about, who, what, where, why, when, and how do it. They will give you answers, and from those answers, you get more questions, and then you get more answers, and you dig and you dig and you dig. And I find that a really fascinating, infuriating too, but primarily fascinating part of the process, because you can look at even the most mundane object and start asking questions about it. And then all of a sudden, I'm holding a pencil and yes, it writes on a piece of paper, but who perhaps has held this pencil before me. What were they doing with it? What were they writing? Were they writing the headline to a news article, or were they signing a contract for a multi-million-dollar sports deal? There are all these different avenues you can go down, and each one needs exploring. And then you strip it back and work out your story from there once you've got your information.
So as a non-fiction writer, and let's talk about that aspect of what you do for now. I know as a fiction writer, often I'll start writing about a particular thing, and as I start researching or looking for more depth in that idea, I find myself going, actually, that's not even the best part of this story. I'm much more interested in this other aspect of the story. But presumably, as a non-fiction writer, you go into a project going, this is the project about Henry Lawson and Banjo Paterson, for example, one of your books. Yep. How much room do you leave in your process to go, actually, that's not a terribly interesting part of this story? I mean, the example I would give perhaps is that movie Lincoln, which Oliver Stone made about Abraham Lincoln, and you expect to be a biopic about him. In a sense it was, but it was actually not about the Civil War or anything like that. It was about a wrangle that he had with the Senate and the House to try and get some piece of legislation passed. Is that something you find yourself doing in your research? Absolutely.
And once again, I could take a leaf out of the journalist's to-do book. And there's a saying, don't bring me a story, bring me an angle. And what I mean by that, you can have a broad narrative, but within that, it always helps, as you mentioned, with the Lincoln example, something that is so specific that you can really drill down into and almost create its own plot in its own sense. I do that a lot, and I look at even the last book I wrote where essentially when I spoke with the publisher, it was about probably to be written in the voice of the subject, so it would be, I did this, I did that, Bernie Shadeshaft, a social worker. But once I got to meet him and started talking to him, I thought it wouldn't do his story justice if I spoke to him. So I went back to the publisher and said, can I interview everyone around him and then use his voice as well mixed in? Because I think it'll give it a lot more layers to him. And by doing that, I found a hell of a lot more interesting stories about him and a lot more depth and dimension. So it is very much a case of reinventing as you go along. You can have a set idea. Yes, I might be talking about the life of James Roy. Then after one initial meeting with you and then going back to do some research, I'll go, okay, well, actually James plays in a band, or he's muso, he plays a number of instruments, and go, wow, that's worth exploring. And until you explore that, you just never know quite what's there, but you've got to open that door to begin with, to give yourself the opportunity to find out what's there.
Do you find, without dropping anyone in it, do you ever find that publishers don't quite go for the angle you're exploring? You go, this is the one I want, and they go, well, actually, we don't think that's going to be terribly interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's becoming harder to do that, particularly when you pitch ideas to publishers, because I'm very much, as you are, very, very story-driven. And I don't know how many times, particularly in recent years, you'll have the case of, yeah, that is a good story, but it won't sell. And I think is a real pity about the way information and stories are perhaps told in the modern day, that we've got to be very, very careful that we don't lose respect and sight of just how we present those stories through the written form.
Especially at a time when the whole, risk of getting a bit political very briefly, at a time when we are told not to trust what we see in the mainstream media because it's fake news or whatever. How do you navigate that space in what you're doing?
Again, it comes back to questions, James, because so many people, and you see it in schoolwork, and it's one thing that I really encourage, and I know, having seen a lot of other writers going to schools and talk to students, that you really encourage that. So many kids, they'll go to Dr. Google and they'll get an answer, and the answer's up there. Well, there's all this space underneath that they don't explore. So, and what happens particularly in this world of information overload, that answer may not necessarily be correct, or if it is, it certainly only gives you one dimension of the answer. So it really does all come back, and I'll hammer it until the proverbials come home. It really is digging, asking those questions, and then knowing what is reputable information and knowing what isn't. And that's an ongoing battle for each and every one of us who every day clicks online to read comments from journalists, news information sites, even comments from your best friends. You really have to learn to differentiate between what is good journalism, what is bad writing, what is good research, what is bad writing.
So what are those questions then? Are they just the who, what, where kind of questions?
Basically, yeah, absolutely. And you can, like I constantly bookmark things, and I go, right, I'll come back to, for example, if I were to be writing about the drought, just doing a small newspaper article or online article about the drought, and I'll see the Namoy River in northwestern New South Wales flows into Keepit Dam, and Keepit Dam is only 0.5% full. I immediately go, well, 0.5% full. Gee, that's very low. So I bookmark it and go, right, 0.5%, it's there, I've got to challenge it, I've got to check it. So it's a matter of fact checking. And there used to be, certainly when I started journalism, we could never broadcast a story. This was a Channel 10 News. We could never broadcast a story when I first started unless the facts were corroborated by 2 independent sources. That, of course, has gone by the wayside now, but I still like to adhere to it. And so whenever there's a little red flag that pops up in my reading or my ears go, that doesn't sit well, I'm also always very conscious of going, right, got to ask more questions of that.
You've also talked about reading widely. I mean, I know that back in the day it was newspapers, and of course now you've got everything that's in the online world. Again, how do you know what's good and what's not? Because if you listen to some certain radio stations or certain websites or certain channel news services, it's a very different set of facts, if you like. I mean, Kellyanne Conway actually used a term, alternate facts, which is which is just mind bending. But how do you make certain that what you're reading is actually the right thing? If let's say you're writing a biography about someone and you go and throw out some piece of factual evidence that is not in fact the case at all.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think it has been the twisting of truth has been around for a long time. If you look, you could go back to the Yellow Press and William Randolph Hearst, who was one of the great early day media mega superstars who owned a lot of press in America. And, he had agendas. And since then, many other proprietors across various forms of the media, yes, they do have agendas. They have business, social, political agendas. So what can be considered a fact by one is not necessarily considered a fact by another news organisation. And sadly, without getting too deep and political in this, it really aggravates me now how there is so much left versus right conversation in the media and in the public space about, well, the left said this, we will say the opposite because we're on the opposite side of the political seesaw. But how do you determine? Bit of experience, bit of a gut feel, and I must admit there are times, often in my past where I haven't got things right, and inexperience particularly was to blame. The older and more hardened I get, I think I make less mistakes, but they're still out there. But when you write something, you have to firmly believe you've done the research behind it to at least believe that your statement or fact will stand up to some form of quite rigorous research. And if it doesn't, put your hand up and go, I got that wrong. It's a very difficult position to be in, and I feel very sorry particularly for writers these days in the media who are under the pressure of not only having to write newspaper copy, they have to write online copy, then they have to put out something on Instagram or on Twitter, and they're across several platforms, and they're across several platforms where they also have to adhere to the pressure of just getting it out there. And it seems to me there's a certain extent now where it's about getting information out there, then getting it right, as opposed to yesteryear where it was, we can sit on this, we've got to get it right first. So harking back to your original question, it's very much a case of just, if you feel that red flag or if you feel uncertain about something, go off and research until you're comfortable with the position you're putting forward. And as I say, sometimes it happens. Sometimes mistakes slip through, as they have in some of my books, and that's one reason why I never, ever, ever read back a book I've read after I get a copy of it, because I'm scared to.
One of my first books, probably the one that kind of put me on the map, so to speak, was the book called Captain Mac, which is about a guy, a guy in the prisoner of war camp in Changi or somewhere similar. But the regiment that I put him in, I discovered after I thought I'd done my research. This is back in the days of going to the library to do your research. You didn't just get online and look things up. You had to go and find the right book. And I was in Hornsby Library and bringing home piles of books. And then when the time came to write the prequel to it, Billy Mac's War, suddenly I realised that the regiment that I'd put him in was never actually fighting in Singapore. So I had to concoct this whole sort of sidebar story to put him in the place where he would have ended up in Changi, which was, clumsy. And I didn't realise I was going to be writing a prequel, so it probably didn't matter so much, or so I thought at the time. But then once I came to write that prequel, I was like, I really wish I'd been a little bit more careful on the first time around.
Yeah, no, it's a tough position, and sometimes I think looking at fiction writers, it can be even tougher, because particularly if you're doing, say, a historical fiction piece, that you've got to base it on some form of fact, whether it be loose or not to begin with, and you can tie yourself up in knots or put yourself in a corner if you don't quite get that launch pad right to begin with.
Now, in the notes you sent me when we were preparing to do this, you said something about asking those questions: who, what, where, why, etc., and reading widely. But then you say, constantly explore your own thoughts about issues large and small. Strip your answers right back. What does that mean?
One of the most important moments as a writer, as a person, and certainly as a parent, happened to me when when my son, who's now just turned 9, he was 3 years old. And I'll tell you the whole story, because as a result of that story, it has made me rethink a lot, not only about writing, but life in general. And I love rain, as so many country people do, but I grew up loving the sound of rain on a tin roof. And there were times there during drought where I'd look out the window and I'd see a far-off strike of lightning over the Mount Blackjack. I lived in a place called Gunnedah, and I'd go, oh, gee, I hope we get a storm. And then you get the little plink, plink, plink on the rooftop, and the rain had thundered down, and I'd wrap myself up under the doona or the blanket as it was back then, and go, oh, yeah, isn't this great? Send her down, Huey. I didn't know what Huey meant, but that's what Mum said, so that was good enough for me. But when Iggy, my son, we were living in suburban Sydney at the time, when he was about 3, I wanted him to experience a thunderstorm. And until that time, basically, he looked at it through a glass window. He'd never, by and large, been out in rain too much. So, come on, mate, we're going out into the backyard. And it was absolutely chucking it down, and there was boom, crash, wallop, thump with the thunder and lightning all around us. And, I was being a bit of a mad dad with water splashing down the face, and Iggy sort of looking up at me, and I was saying, mate, see that? Hear that? That's electricity. That's so powerful. That's Mother Nature. And after one really loud sort of crack, he squeezed my hand really tightly, and he said, Daddy, and yes, mate, what's on the other side? And I sort of looked at him and said, what do you mean, mate? And he said, what's on the other side of the sky? And to him, it was the sky cracking. Mm-hmm. Lightning was the sky cracking.
Right.
Through the eyes of a child. And, sometimes we are tarnished by having too much knowledge and too much experience. And it really does help to strip it back as though you're a painter and you've got a blank canvas and you go, right, where do I begin? And I think it can be the same, or not I know it is the same with storytelling, in that sometimes assumption can be very much your worst enemy, because you've jumped 1 or 2 or 3 stages of your writing because you've already assumed that's happened or people will know about that person. But if you strip it back and look through a child's eyes and continually be curious about what's around you and use all your senses, you're going to go on a hell of a lot more rewarding journey, I think. So it's all tied in with curiosity, and you certainly work with fiction in the imagination space and tapping into it. I call it IT. Everyone needs their imagination time. So when on that note, it was about that I sent to exploring your own thoughts. This is where running becomes important, James. Quite often when I'm out and about and I just sort of like a Melbourne Cup horse on the back straight where it's half asleep and you just let it nod off before it's got to charge home. And I'm in that state with my running. That's when I start thinking about my life or thinking about family or just whatever might be on my mind or what may come into my mind. And I strip the issue back. And it really gives me a much greater clarity of thought. And I think it's a wonderful place to be in, and I'd highly recommend anyone try it. Even if you think you know everything about everything, start at the very bottom and look for that crack in the sky and see what you can see.
It reminds me of one of my favourite jokes, actually. Sherlock Holmes and Watson are camping, and in the middle of the night, Watson is woken by Sherlock Holmes shaking him. He says, "Watson, look at the stars. What do they tell you?" And Watson thinks, "I've had about enough of this as I can take." So he thinks, "I'm going to put this to bed once and for all. I'm going to go through every possibility." So he says, "Okay, fair enough." So I look at the stars. Cartologically, I can see that the Southern Cross is at my feet, so that's south down there. Meteorologically, I can see it's a clear night, so probably a clear day. Astronomically, I can see that we're in the middle of the Milky Way. Astrologically, I can see that Venus is coming to Neptune, so Sagittarian's going to have a rough week. Chronologically, I can see it's about 3 a.m. How am I going so far? And Sherlock Holmes says, "No, Watson, you Burke, someone's stolen our tent."
Yes, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
So, I guess that sort of illustrates your point a little bit, I think,
absolutely. And it is the most joyful space to be in. Like Iggy, he's a devil to get to sleep at night, an absolute devil, and he's got a whole thick encyclopedia full of distraction theories, which he pulls out at random. Okay, I'll work on tactic number 36 tonight, and I'll get Dad to talk about maths or get Dad to talk about a cricket tour or something. And on one night, his distraction theory was just off the chart questions, and it always starts with "Dad," followed by the little pause. "Yes, mate. If you can see through everything, does that mean you're blind?" And I went, wow, that's coming from then he would have been about 6, and you go, that's the way kids think.
If you can see through everything, does that mean you're blind?
Yeah. And when you think about it, well, you can't see anything if you're seeing through everything.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
And I thought, wow, that's, and that's the way kids think. And I think a lot more of the world's problems could be solved if we give a greater platform to kids in a room with, experts as well, and go, so what do you think about the glaciers melting?
Well, we asked Greta Thunberg, and we know how that worked out for her, don't we?
Yeah. There's so much judgment in the world, but that's an issue for another day. But I genuinely do, and as I said to you, right, to preempt this whole theme, is that it's not only made a difference to my writing, it's made me, I think, a much more rounded individual. It's certainly helped with my parenthood and in relationships and just the world at large, to really strip things back and ask those questions. And it's uplifting. So
we're going to run out of time in a while, so we need to kind of move on. But how do these ideas that you and I don't mind that we've taken a bit of we've kind of done what you're advocating, I guess. We've taken a bit of an idea and just seen where it leads, and found ourselves going down some interesting little cul-de-sacs. But these are ideas. Once you've got the idea, how do you expand on that?
I'll show you if you like.
So
can you see that?
I can see that, but our podcast listeners can't. So what it is it's a big piece of it's A3 paper with a whole lot of writing on it.
No, it's basically a whole folder full of poster-sized bits of paper. That's right. How I begin. And I will, primarily in the non-fiction genre, if I'm doing your life story, if I were to interview you, and I interviewed your wife and your family and your friends and your colleagues and all the rest, and after going back and fastidiously listening to all the interviews, my process begins with very large pieces of paper, and they become my map. And I'm constantly scuffing out some lines and adding other bits of line. Do I work chronologically, or do I work on a particular angle? And once I work on that angle, how do I bring the other bits of the story into it? That's where it all begins. And then there's a bit of trial and error. Unfortunately, and I say this in bold, unfortunately, writing in the non-fiction space, quite often I'm very much dictated by the publisher's deadline, and they can be pretty tight, pretty savage. And when you're doing that, you don't necessarily get the best product you can, because you just don't have the time to go back and finesse and rewrite. Obviously, it can still go through the editing process, but I think it's one of the unfortunate parts about being almost a commercial writer in the non-fiction field, that you're driven by that big thundercloud that hangs over your head and follows you around for the 9 or 10 or 12 months or however long the project takes. But initially, it all very much begins with a big piece of paper and drawing a map from there, and then just experimenting as you go.
And I guess that's sometimes when you find yourself, as I said at the beginning, you find yourself going, actually, I'm spending a lot more time on this particular corner of the graph at the moment.
Yeah, and it's an important lesson, and this is why it's so important for other people to read your work, or if I've come from a television and radio background as well, and that let other people look at your story and look at the way you've done things, because what you can think is good writing or a really important piece, someone else will go, yeah, no. And that's really important. You can be too precious about some of your own stuff.
I was going to say that, you and I have spoken recently about the show on Amazon, The Test, which is about, it's fly on the wall following the Australian cricket team as they came back from the disaster and the debacle that was the Cape Town ball tampering thing. But the people who made that have had to make a choice, haven't they? They've had to go, now, are we going to follow Steve Smith's path back, or are we going to follow David Warner's, or are we going to look at the way coaching methods changed? Are we going to look at the way the media dealt with this? And in actual fact, what it ends up really being about is how Justin Langer has more or less transformed the team, or at least ostensibly from the outside. Justin Langer, and it's really about the coach's relationship with the team is really at the centre of that. But it could have really been about any of those different things, couldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you start a project like that, which is an overwhelmingly large project, you would have a few, don't bring me a story, bring me an angle, we get back to that. You would have a few points where you go, okay, maybe it's about Smith or Langer, or maybe it's about the reformation of David Warner. You would have all those at the back of your mind, and until you actually get into it, particularly because it's an observational documentary style where it's fly on the wall, as you're saying, you don't quite know what's ever going to happen, as opposed to the horrendous reality TV genre where everything is so overscripted, it's just banal. But you've got to be ready to pounce on it. And you may have pounced on it 2 weeks into filming, and then you go, right, okay, well, we've got to reshuffle a bit of stuff because this is our strong stuff.
And you're probably going to have to throw some good stuff away as well, aren't you? Which is something you do as a writer. You go, that footage of David Warner getting hit in the head in the nets, that's of no use to us if we're taking this other angle,
Yeah, and it's certainly in television, and it works certainly in writing as well. But I always used to think, when sitting in an edit booth in putting a story together with an editor, no one at home knows what you leave out. They're only judging you by what you put in. Yeah.
And it was interesting with that, what you say you haven't seen it yet, that
No.
There is one moment, and I'm not spoiling anything for anyone because this is my point, is that when I watched it, there's a moment where Usman Khawaja is sitting down and Justin Langer says to him, so tell me what's going on. The guy's sort of a bit distant at the moment. And Usman Khawaja says, can I be completely honest? He said, I'd rather you were. And he says, basically, the guys are scared of walking on eggshells around you because you're actually being a bit unfair and a bit too hard on them. And the look on Justin Langer's face is sort of half smile, like, how dare you? And you can just tell he's absolutely steaming. And at the time I thought, that's an interesting moment. And then about 3 or 4 days ago, the news story came out saying that, somebody had noticed this and said that was the moment when Usman Khawaja's Test career died, when he had the courage to say that to Justin Langer. Now, whether or not that is true or not isn't really my point. My point is that for me was a moment that needed to be explored more. So that was an opportunity for those guys to explore something different that they didn't.
Yeah, I think when you look at moments like this, and as I say, I pass judgment on the test, but who is the overseer of that whole project? And how much control does Cricket Australia perhaps have in it or doesn't have in it can determine what story angles are chosen and what aren't. I'm not saying rightly or wrongly that has happened in this case, but I will, if you like, very quickly, if you like the test and you get Netflix during this time of self-isolation, there's a cracker sports ob doc on there called Sunderland Till I Die.
Oh, yes.
And it's worth watching. It is.
Well, I watched that prepared to hate it because I'm a Newcastle United supporter, so I can't say anything good about Sunderland. It's written in the rule book. It's just that's how it is.
Yeah, no. Well, that comes up in the documentary a bit, but I thought that was very well done. Whether there was people overlooking it who wanted to really pull the strings about the storyline, who knows? But it certainly took me in because it was very much, and this is one thing that I'd like to think about the way I present stories, is it's very much about the people.
Your latest book is called Back on Track, which tells the life of 2020 Australian Local Hero of the Year, Bernie Shakeshaft. That sounds to me, that as a writer, I wouldn't see that and go, that's a story I need to go digging into. What was it made you go digging into the life of somebody who set up a not-for-profit, if you like, a social worker who wins Local Hero of the Year and then goes on and sets up an organisation? What was the angle when someone says, bring me the angle? What was the angle that made you bring that story?
Well, a publisher first approached me.
Right.
And Bernie, I'd known about Bernie for any number of years, and my mother, who lives still in a country town, Bernie actually spent time in that country town. He's now based in Armidale. And he uses as one of the core elements of his program working dogs, primarily border collies, to help re-engage youths. And as you'd be aware where you are, on this side of the Great Divide, as opposed to the other side, that there is a great, I won't say crisis, but there is certainly a significant problem, an alarming problem, with disengagement of youths. They can't find work, or they don't suit the education system, and they may carry a lot of other baggage from their home life or whatever the case may be. And Bernie, over a period of years, has not only set up this organisation through his own goodness, but he's dragged along the whole Armidale community with him to be part of it. And that's one of the most extraordinary parts of this story. Yes, he's got these beautiful images of boys cuddling beautiful border collies, but the fact that so many people have had their own voluntary buy-in to a really tough story, and these kids imagine the unimaginable, and a lot of them have been there. And that itself, and I think there should be more of those sorts of stories, but from a publishing perspective, I dipped my lid to the publisher, Hachette, because they took a risk on it, because those sort of books in a commercial market are certainly a risk, but when you get into them, you go, oh, wow, that's... And I'm very proud that story has been told, and Bernie has gone on to, as you say, win the Local Hero of the Year, and he's doing terrific stuff, and he will, and his whole community will continue to.
James Knight, thank you so much for talking to us today with WestWords Mini-masterclasses. I'm going to come back to you at some point and pick your brains about some other things, but would you like, as we wrap up, would you like to give us a short plug for your website?
Don't worry about that. People can type a name in and find me online. If not, they'll find another James Knight who might be more interesting than me. Who knows, James? So thank you very much, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I've really, really enjoyed it. And I look forward to coming out and having a run through the Blue Mountains with you.
And actually, a run? Oh, my God. You can make the run through the Blue Mountains, stop at my house, I'll make you a coffee. How's that sound?
It's a work in progress.
A work in progress. Yeah, thanks so much, mate. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.